In this explainer, we're tackling a pretty fundamental challenge. How do you actually go from a completely empty folder on your computer to a powerful, modern application? Well, we're going to walk through the essential first steps to build a really solid foundation for your next big idea. So, here's our game plan. We'll start with the absolute basics, how to set up a project. Then, we'll get into how to use pre-built code, so you're not reinventing the wheel. After that, we'll dive into organizing our data with objects, see how different apps talk to each other using JSON, and then wrap it all up by learning how to keep our code neat and tidy. Let's get into it. All right, first up, starting your project. You know, every single great application starts right here, in a totally empty folder. So let's look at the key commands that turn this blank slate into an environment that's actually ready for code.
And it really is this simple. We start with absolutely nothing but a new directory on our computer. This is our blank canvas, our ground zero.
Okay, so the first command we run is tsc-init. That creates our tsconfig.json file. Just think of this as the official rulebook for our TypeScript code. Next, npm-init-y. This one generates a package JSON file, which is basically our project's passport. It tracks all the important details and any external code we decide to use. And finally, we just create our main.ts file. That's where the core logic of our app is going to live. And just like that, our project's foundation is set.
All right, moving on to section 2, using pre-built code. We're going to introduce NPM, which is your best friend when it comes to not reinventing the wheel. Now that our project has an identity, thanks to that package.json file, let's give it some superpowers.
You know, this is such a fundamental question in modern development. Why would you write code that somebody else has already perfected? I mean, think about something as basic as a calculator. The logic for addition, subtraction, multiplication, it's been written thousands, if not millions of times. Wouldn't it be awesome if you could just borrow that code instead of writing it all over again? And this brings us to NPM, the Node Package Manager. It's basically a massive, public, online library for code. But really, it's more than just a time saver. It's a symbol of the collaborative power of open source. When you use packages from NPM, you are literally standing on the shoulders of giants, using the work of countless other developers to build your own cool stuff. So let's install our very first package with npm install @types/node. Now, this specific package helps our code editor understand all the built-in features of Node.js, which just makes our life easier. But what's really important here is to watch what happens in our project folder the second we hit enter on this command. So what just happened? Two things were created. First, a new folder pops up called node_modules. This is the physical spot where all the code you download from NPM is stored. You pretty much never need to look inside it, just know that's where it lives. Second, a new section appears in our package.json file called dependencies. This works like a checklist, a list of all the books we've checked out from the NPM library for our project. It's how our project keeps track of everything it needs to run. Okay, let's move into our code and see how this all builds up in section 3, organizing data with objects. We're going to go from messy variables to tidy, structured data. See, every single application needs to handle data, but not all data is created equal. So the big question is, how do we keep related pieces of information grouped together in a way that makes sense?
Now, what's really cool about this slide is the contrast. On the left, we've got what I call the messy way. We have 3 separate disconnected variables to describe a single user. Username, user age, is married. Yeah, it works, but it's just disorganized. Now look to the right. That's the organized way. We're using a JavaScript object, you see the curly braces, to group all that related data into a single clean variable called user. So much better.
And this is a great way to think about it. Think of an object like a digital ID card. It's one item that holds multiple related pieces of information. Name, age, address, all in one place. An object basically bundles these properties, or keys like username, with their values, like Hamza, into one single logical unit. So the most important part is, once we have our data in an object, how do we actually use it? Well, we can easily get to specific pieces of it using dot notation. So user.username would just give us Hamza. But here's where it gets really powerful. Objects can also hold functions, and when a function is inside an object, we call it a method. In fact, the console.log command that we use all the time works exactly this way. Console is just an object, and log is one of its methods. And that brings us perfectly to section 4, JSON, the universal language. This is all about how your app talks to the rest of the world. Our JavaScript object is awesome for using inside our program. But what happens when we need to send this data somewhere else?
maybe to another server, or to an app written in a totally different language, like Python.
That's exactly where JSON comes in. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and as you can see in this table, it looks a lot like a JavaScript object, but it follows a few very strict rules that make it a universal format. First, its whole purpose is for transferring data, not working with it inside your program. Second, and this is a big one, the keys must be in double quotes. And third, JSON is for static data only. You can't have any functions in there. These simple rules make it a pure data format that pretty much any programming language on the planet can understand.
Okay, here we are at the final section, Section 5, keeping your code tidy, using modules to avoid one giant file. So our project is growing. We've got our setup, we're using external code from NPM, we've got our data organized into nice objects. But as we write more and more of our own logic, that main.ts file, it's going to get really, really long.
This visual just says it all, doesn't it? Imagine trying to read a book that was written on a single 5,000-line scroll, with no chapters, no paragraphs. Trying to find one specific part or fix a little mistake would be an absolute nightmare. Well, we face the exact same problem when we just dump all of our code into one giant file.
The solution is to think like an author and break our book into chapters. In programming, we call these modules. We break our application into smaller, more focused files. So maybe you'll have one file for all the calculation logic, another for handling user greetings, and a third for connecting to a database. Each file has one single, clear job.
So how do these separate files talk to each other? It's through this really simple but powerful system of import and export. In step 1, inside a file like calculator.ts, you use the export keyword to make a specific function, like our add function, available to the outside world. Then, in step 2, back in your main.ts file, you use the import keyword to pull in that specific add function from the calculator file. And that's pretty much it. In step 3, you can now use that add function as if it was written right there in main.ts. This system is the absolute key to keeping your code organized, reusable, and so much easier to understand as your project gets bigger. And that wraps up our guide to setting up a modern app. By mastering these core concepts, project setup with NPM, organizing your data with objects in JSON, and structuring your code with modules, you've officially gone beyond writing simple little scripts and into the world of building real, structured, professional-grade applications. You now have the keys. So the only question left is, what are you going to build first?